Hello, class, and welcome to week 2 of your nonprofit management seminar. Um, Today, I'm just going to briefly review and try and contextualize the 3 different readings, shove them together, and maybe even make some sense to what happened last week. And then I'll take you through what we're doing this week and give you a preview of what's coming up. So this is the figure 1 from the Solomon et al. Piece. When you see Lester Solomon, I want you to think that is a man who knows nonprofit research. He knows nonprofits. He's a very well-known nonprofit scholar. He's written several of the books that are considered pivotal. So when you read a work by Solomon, he's very accessible, as you can tell from this reading, but I want you to also think about how he has actually had a bigger impact on the sector. And I think this particular figure has had an impact on the sector. It's from 2012, so it's been out for 6 years, and people have been talking about it a lot. I just wanted to go through each of these different impulses, right? These different, I would call them institutions that are pulling nonprofits in different directions. The original is probably voluntarism, right? If so, go back to last week when you were reading the piece by Hall, and that social problems are rooted in values of disadvantage. The role of sector is to inculcate values, right? Provide material support. This is the original view of nonprofits that Hall describes from around the time of the Revolution, where volunteer associations got together and tried to help out people, right? And then we moved on to sort of a civic activism role. And this is where Jane Addams takes over, where she starts the Hall House. She starts to see social problems, tries to solve those social problems. We also see the Ford Foundation doing some of this, and the Rockefeller Foundation trying to get at the root of these social problems instead of just dealing with the symptoms, right? And in order to do that, they have to act in political ways. Now we see some more modern, what just happened? We see some more modernization of the nonprofit sector. We get commercialism showing up. This looks a lot like entrepreneurialism. It's this very specific attempt, and managerialism is this very specific attempt to bring in certain ways of constructing public services. Instead of trying to find experts, if you're hiring in from this perspective, instead of trying to find experts in the subject matter, you'd very much look for experts in the processes through which things got made. You look for people who are good at innovation, people who are good at managing people and processes, and then you'd ask them to find the expertise necessary through volunteers or via hiring professionals at that stage. And that's definitely a upcoming thing, especially after after reinvention, which is discussed Never in his chapter that's due this week, that you should read this week. And reinvention was about sort of bringing in this sort of commercial expertise. I call it entrepreneurialism and managerialism, but you can combine it into this sort of business-like practices being put into the nonprofit. And that's slightly different, mind you, than professionalism, which isn't so much business-like practices as it is trying to create a profession of nonprofit professionals, people who get together around the nonprofit and try and solve social problems as a profession. And this has created different kinds of problems and different types of opportunities as well. So I want to take a step back. And of course, in the Solomon piece, they go on to discuss how their the views that nonprofit professionals have of themselves and their sector fits into this framework, right? These 4 impulses that are pulling at the nonprofit sector. And they definitely have some of this professionalism in those views when they talk about how important effectiveness is and productivity. Although productivity was the least common view that they said. But now let's look between these sectors, right? Between these impulses. Volunteerism and professionalism and commercialism are really closely related in a lot of ways. Professionalism is this idea that there's a nonprofit professional class, so what you're training to enter. And volunteerism, one of the things that the nonprofit professional class is supposed to be able to do is leverage and use and manage volunteers, get volunteers into the nonprofits and make them effective at delivering services, right? Also, they talk a lot about social capital and how that's part of the profession. Commercialism also is related to volunteerism in that you look for professional volunteers. You look for people who are willing to donate their time, and then you, the nonprofit, just becomes this conduit for making things and innovating things and bringing together volunteers, right? Being an entrepreneur, which literally means grabbing and taking together or using your hands to pull something together, right? Being an entrepreneur to pull together the right volunteers for the right project. Civic activism, though, is different than this. Professionals don't engage in civic activism, right? That goes back down to that public, the dichotomy that's famous in public administration between politics and administration, right? And that is the idea that people who are doing this work and implementing the services to the poor shouldn't be acting in a way that's civically engaged, that's active. They should be instead just doing what they're told, because what they're told is the will of the people. Well, nonprofits, the will of the people doesn't matter as much as the will of the marketplace, right? And the will of your donors and the will of, hopefully, your beneficiaries. So civic activism plays a less important role when you look at professionalism and commercialism. But it is related, because commercialism in particular thinks a lot about marketing, about gaining donations, about gaining support, about gaining the support of politicians. And that means doing something that looks a lot like grassroots and civic activism. That means doing something that looks very political, swaying minds, swaying hearts and minds to gain something for your profession. So you see, commercialism is in a lot of ways related to civic activism, in the same way that professionalism is in a lot of ways related to volunteerism, and they're all related. But in these margins in between, things can get messy. For example, in the King piece that you'll read for today, we have a person who works in a nonprofit that's very volunteer oriented, and he gets dragged toward professionalism when he applies for funding and finds himself needing to create these professional deadlines and doing these very professional and commercial things to maintain the nonprofit. And he's dragged away from volunteerism. It's written from a first person point of view by the actual researcher who was the one running the nonprofit. So even though they're related and they're not necessarily at odds, these four impulses are also they can also pull each other away, if you know what I mean. They can take up too much space. So if you're doing too much, spending too much time over here in commercialism, you're going to get lost when it comes to volunteerism, especially. Civic activism and commercialism look similar, but if you're doing it for donations instead of to help your clients, and where it should be in civic activism, things get mixed up, right? And we want to keep it somewhere in the middle, because the left side of your screen looks like government, the right side looks like for-profit, and nonprofits sort of want to stay in the middle here. So hopefully that puts it into some context. I know it's a little bit rambly, but I tried to make sense of it in a way that'll help you through today's readings and help you incorporate last week's readings into today's readings. I call it an institutional context because institutions are these groups of rules, right? So when you think about a school, the school has all these rules that you have to follow to get your degree. The buildings themselves are just buildings. It's that institution, it's those groups of rules that makes the school valuable to you, right? Rules that I have to follow, I have to teach you. That's my job, and I'm being paid to do that. That's an institution. And then you have to follow. You have to do your homework and participate in the discussions. And then eventually you'll get your degree. That's how the institution of the university works. Right? So these institutions are these groups of rules. And these institutions, professionalism, commercialization, volunteerism, and civic activism, civic communications, are all institutions that are pulling on the nonprofit sector. So this week we're going to read, finish your self-care plan, which we talked about last week. Pay close attention to deliverables. Make sure you've got a deliverable that you can actually hand in. Something that's going to really record whether or not you met your little goals toward that big goal. I can't really measure big goals like you're a better person now, but I can measure little goals like you, like me. I'm trying to cry once a week. I'm writing down what day I'm crying on. Read the Never text in the Rents book. That's your textbook. He talks about, he's a brilliant theorist who does a lot of great work. And he wrote this really good chapter for this book. Read Solomon et al., the graphic the figure comes from. Read King, who's the guy who moved from volunteerism to professionalization, or maybe volunteerism from commercialization. I guess you should try and decide which one. Complete the survey so I can help you get what you need to do well in this course. And then complete the discussion. Remember that you have to do your initial post by Wednesday at midnight to get full points, and you have to do your secondary post by Friday at midnight. If you don't do your initial post by Wednesday at midnight, 75 points are all on the initial post. So if you don't do your initial post by Wednesday at midnight, and you do it by, say, Thursday at noon, that'll count as 10% off because it's a one-day delay, right? That's the late policy here. And you will get 7.5% off. If it's 2 days delayed, if you wrote it on Friday, you would get 15 points off. So you would no longer be able to get an A on that assignment. And I want to talk about what it means to give a genuine response in a discussion. It can mean a couple of things. I suggest either reflecting or interrogating. Reflecting is pick something that you don't quite understand or that you sort of understand that the initial poster said, and then try and say it in your own words and say, is that what you meant? That's reflecting. That's a really good skill to have both as a manager and as an academic when you're thinking about this academic work that we're engaged in this class. And also interrogating. That is to say, if you really are asking genuine questions that you really want to know the answer to, you're not setting someone up so you can have an argument. You're not saying, I know something that you don't. You're asking a genuine question about something that you were unclear about in the text. I guarantee you, everyone is going to be unclear about something in these discussions. We all are. Even the best journal articles, the best books are unclear about something. Try and get clarification. That's the job of a really good discussion, is to get clarification so that these ideas make more sense to all of us. Next week, we're going to do nonprofit ethics, which is a particular interest of mine. I've got 2 publications in the works on this, and I do a lot of research around this area. We'll read another chapter in Wren's. We'll read a chapter by Jane Addams from last week, the woman who ran Hull House. She wrote something on nonprofit ethics. It's really astounding. And 2 chapters of the Krakauer book, which is a really great book and fun to read. It's a page turner. So it shouldn't be as hard as it sounds. It should be a really easy read for you. And then just have a discussion where I'll put up some ethical problems, talk about the ethical problems that you read in the Krakauer book. All right, so that's it. I'll see you next week. Thanks a lot for your time.